Welcome to the Fall 2025 Civics Corps podcast, in which students of the Civics Corps and members of Waging Dialogue will conduct a meta dialogue about their work this term that led to the fourth annual Veterans Speak production in November of this year. Participating in the Civics Corps this semester were Abigail Rich, Alyssa O'Driscoll, Lindsay Maloney. The three of them are unable to make it for this recording, and Travis Mills, who's also not able to make it. But with us tonight is Gabriel View and Samantha Birch. Representing Waging Dialogue will be Matt Bugatti and Dr. Alice Mayer. So we're going to go ahead and get started chatting about the production of Veteran Speak. And so for the first question for tonight, it is, content-wise, what did you learn from the panelists' histories or their intergenerational interactions? In other words, what stood out to you the most? Or what did you find emotionally meaningful or even surprising?
I suppose I'll start. I felt we heard a lot of powerful stories, a lot of things that aren't really talked about in the open. I know from two of our veterans, we heard some really personal stories and some things that really resonate with them, even to this day, even some that haven't been in service for decades. So I thought that was really powerful to see how long it really impacts you and what it does for your life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Something I noticed is just that no matter the age difference of your veterans, there's a connection to all of them. Like they all feel a sense of connection to each other, and that's expressed in their stories, even if they've had different experiences or served in different wars or different time frames. They all have like a familyness about them.
And it happened pretty quickly too, that sense of connection. We had, of course, on the panel a Korean War veteran. We had two Vietnam War era veterans. One was a merchant mariner, the other one was an Army nurse. Excuse me. We had some Gen X folks and some millennial folks who also had quite a diversity of experiences. Matt, Alice, what stood out to you from the
That would be a
panelists?
very, I mean, that would be a very good question for a future panel. Would be trying to get a handle on why that why that connection exists,
Mm,
because it doesn't immediately guy who, without obviously without denigrating anyone's service, you have one guy who had their leg amputated, and then you have someone else who served on a merchant marine vessel, did not see combat necessarily. Why does that connection exist? Is that something that is sort of culturally ingrained in the training, perhaps, in culturally the way we look at the military? That would be a very interesting question, to bring to a future panel, since we're trying to think meta here.
yeah.
Yeah, I found myself thinking about what it must be like to come from anywhere and everywhere and be thrown together with strangers, knowing that you have to bond with these people because they're going to keep you alive and you're going to keep them alive. And that idea must really push you to form those kinds of bonds, to care about each other. I almost envied that because in the outside world, it's almost the opposite of that, that social media pushes us away from each other. And it's a bond that I found myself envying.
It was fascinating when our panelists opened up this year a little differently than in previous years about their personal tragedies a bit more. In particular, the gentleman that had dealt with the shrapnel and the panelist who had been the Army nurse. talking about military sexual trauma. And it was fascinating to see how the other panelists very quickly, offered words of support and I would say even to a degree encouragement with each other as they discussed. What did any of that in particular, was that some of the stuff that stood out to you, or I mean, I'm sure that those two things were quite memorable, but just sort of bringing that to the fore, what were some of your thoughts about some of those interactions that occurred?
I think something that helped was how we mentioned at our last meeting that our panelists were closer together in like an age gap than before. And I think the respect level was different than previous years, especially because of having like an older World War II veteran. There's that like awe and reverence and respect. Whereas this time it was, okay, I was maybe not there with you physically, but I've been there with you. We saw a lot of the same things, same time frame, and I think the respect. Maybe that could be how it formed quicker and the bonds formed quicker this semester, possibly.
Yeah, it could be. Other thoughts on that question?
I agree with you, Sam, about how being closer in that age gap and maybe even the time frame of service within, 10, 20 years of each other kind of made it a little easier for them to connect and have that more meaningful dialogue and then, really bring some powerful words out for the audience.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's go ahead and segue to question two. And honestly, Matt kind of set this up a little bit in raising the question about like, is this something we should talk about in future Veteran Speak? And that is part of what we do the meta dialogue for, is to allow a space to debrief and consider what other interactions do you think would have been nice to see? Or what other questions, now that you've been through, this experience, and of course, Sam Combs, who is Sam Birch, who is our Civics Corps mentor and intern student, has been with us for a while, and whereas Gabriel, this is his first year with the Civics Corps. There's a lot of time to reflect and think back. Was there anything that you would like to do differently, or ask different questions next time based on this experience? And Matt kind of set one up. Are there others?
Personally, I really look forward to hopefully next year having more women on the panel myself. I know our first year we had a lady from the uh, Merchant Marine on the panel, and then we've had our Vietnam Army nurse twice now, and um, I think there's still a slight stigma that men typically join the military, which is true. But I would be curious to hear more of a woman's perspective, especially since I know, I mean, I read about it, but even our Vietnam Army nurse, like when they came home, there were people that refused to believe that women were in Vietnam. And that's just something that I'd like to hear more of myself,
Yeah.
especially them coming home, coming back to that
Hmm.
typical like it's time to be a mom or it's time to be a wife, it's time to be a housewife type life for a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
To
Other
touch on
thoughts?
to touch on Sam's, I think it is, yeah, like she said, it would be difficult, especially because they are, I mean, more underrepresented in events like Veteran Speak, where we just haven't had as many. So it's harder to tell their story to the masses, right? We don't understand what it was like exactly for them in Vietnam and coming home, like Sam said, and then in other conflicts,
Mm.
like in the Middle East and things like that.
Well, maybe something to be working towards next year, right? That's a good idea. Alice, Matt, did you have anything you want to add? I know Matt already
Y-
expressed his one idea.
Well, yeah, I'll also say that this is something that's come up a few times in these events, is the generational divide over whether you would tell your kids to join the military.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a tough subject to approach because it's the intersection of trauma and politics. Uh, but it's an important question, and I'd love to try and find ways to approach it in the future.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. So let's think about, this work that we do with intergenerational dialogue. If we were to do more intergenerational dialogue just across the United States in general, if that goal could be amplified, not just with our work, but or who knows, maybe branches of the Civics Corps all across the country, but if it could in general be amplified, if more people would tune into the value of intergenerational conversations, whether they're structured or unstructured, what do you think overall would be the benefits for our country if we talked more intergenerationally, like we are right now in a way?
I think there'd be a lot more understanding, right? I think part of the understanding that we're lacking today is we're just not having those conversations, those difficult conversations, and trying to really pick apart these arguments that we're having. We more or less just put out our argument, and they put out theirs, and they just clash because we're not able to really find the common ground that we all should be able to find. We all live together in a society. We all are working towards more or less the same goals. It's just we can be blinded by our own arguments, and it's kind of hard to bring those together. So I think through more conversations like that, we would be able to come together as we have in the past, right? We were more united, uh, in different years throughout history. Of course, there's always been conflicts and problems. And ideally, we can finish or we can resolve those with conversations instead of conflicts.
Hmm. Hmm.
Tony, I found myself um, doing an intergenerational dialogue every day on TikTok. And I decided at some point that I wanted to do that. And I wasn't entirely clear why, but I found it fascinating because I can talk about, I'll sometimes say, at 73, wisdom is a thing.
Yeah.
It's, and here's, let me tell you my 2 minute, you know, piece of history. What psychiatry was like, what psychoanalysis was like, what it was like to interact with people back in the day, and how that's changed. And young people are fascinated. And there's no other place where I would be able to have those conversations.
Yeah.
My people are all my generation because we know each other and we speak the same language. But I just find it very energizing to hear young people and to invite them to hear me.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
That is that makes sense. I mean, every wisdom is a thing, and you always hear that you learn from your elders or you can learn from your elders, but really you learn from everyone. I can learn from someone my age, I can learn from my elders.
Yeah.
You can learn from your little sister, someone younger than you. And by opening up these conversations and by having our panelists, every year we take away a new story.
Right.
And it sticks with us into the next time we do a panel, and we usually bring it up in our panel. Last year we learned this, and if especially if
Oh,
Oops, you froze.
that was frozen.
Oh dear. Yeah.
It's okay. She'll usually that'll kind of bounce back in. And I know, from working with Sam, I know that what she was saying is absolutely, true, that we've often reflected on, wow, those were some powerful lessons. And every time we debrief, it's, the students in particular give us ideas on how we can deepen this dive to pull more of an intergenerational benefit from it. And we just keep on keeping on. So let me ask you this then, in kind of moving on to the next question. Um, this is aligned, and I think Alice kind of got the ball rolling with it, which is, you're working with, say you're just with a group of your friends around your age, about your age group. What advice would you give to somebody around your age about the benefits of having, like, again, whether it be a structured event like Veteran Speak, just going and participating, or just saying, hey, let's just get together and go have coffee with our grand uncles or something, where you get together with some people intentionally of older generations just to socialize. What advice would you give to others around your age? And so this is for everybody because, like Alice said, her friends tend to group around their age group, et cetera, et cetera. That's normal. But what advice would you give to somebody around your age about the benefits of, taking that step and actually being intentional about intergenerational dialogue?
I'd tell my friends that it's good to get out there outside of your own circle and really, like Sam was saying, learn from your elders, right? I mean, they don't even have to be your elders, but there are a lot of things that you can learn from anybody, right? I mean, we have lots of resources around us now, and certainly way more with the internet.
Hmm.
But certainly here on campus, right, we have very different perspectives, from one discipline to the next, right? So you can learn a lot just from the people around you, and I think that's one area where we really lack right now is we don't see outside of our groups, right? We can't see that they might know something that we don't, and it would be beneficial to both groups to, right, interchange ideas and really grow both. It really is a sense of mutualism between the two groups.
Yeah, yeah. And I know that even on campus, we used to have a lot more intergenerationality when students were taking more on-campus classes. And let's say over the years, we've migrated to online, and online can be engaging and it can be, fun and very obviously educational. But a lot of the engagements online are pretty quick. The students go in, they get their work done, then and then they move on, and that doesn't and the age is irrelevant on that because people live busy lives, which is why they often take online. So as online education has increased and we've seen less and less attendance to on campus events and classes, we've lost some of that in the learning experience. So to me it almost becomes like a place like the Civics Corps or other other types of interactions can really fill a void there that was part of the college experience for most people up until online really took over. Let's keep going with this question. Matt, Alice, thoughts?
Uh, Explain what you mean, because people speak different languages,
Mm.
even if they don't literally speak the different languages, you know. But in a abstract sense, people speak different languages.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get what Matt is saying. I know there's a lot of, certainly with my generation, right? There is this large, right? We're all speaking the same language, but there is different usages, and it's just it can be hard, right, for different groups to understand each other. And I also want to focus on what Dr. Cleese said about, more students are moving towards these online environments, and it's hard for them to see outside of their sphere because they believe that that's the most beneficial for them, right? You don't have to go through these hard conversations, these hard interactions with your classmates and your professor, right, where you have to do these presentations. Online learning, it makes it's just easier to approach, right? But these are like the learning moments where when you go through them and have these in-person experiences where you can talk to a group and give a presentation, right? That's where you really grow as an individual, right? With the online environment now, it's just very difficult for us to have these, growth moments, which means it's harder to have those conversations in the future because we don't have the same social skills we would have had 20 years ago with that in-person college environment. So I think that's another problem is you got to really put yourself in these tough situations and take as many like in-person classes and now, like you said, do as many in-person clubs as you can because that's really where you have to fill the gap and do like these things.
Yeah, yeah. For sure. And I think that it's very clear when you look at it and you zoom out on the present, and you look at it from this wider angle of history, which is, my area of expertise. We know that when you look at political culture and we're in one of those times where it's tense and it's tough and all those kinds of things. What we know that a lot of political division is actually an unintended kind of or unrealized downstream effect from generational gaps, where the transmission of generational knowledge and much of which can occur in very spontaneous ways, and mostly that will happen more in an in-person, face-to-face environment where all of a sudden you're having those sort of aha moments with each other, and then that sparks that energy of being with another human being right there, kind of sparks more curiosity, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we know that that transmission of intergenerational knowledge, when if that breaks down, that ripples out into society in ways that are often quite negative and not well understood when when it's actually happening. So the breakdowns that are occurring 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years in terms of intergenerational conversation, we know has a negative effect downstream, if you will. Sam's back.
We
Sam,
missed you.
yeah, we were talking about what advice would you give someone your age, and both, Gabriel and you are relatively close in age, about the benefits of participating in intergenerational dialogues, whether they're structured or whether you do it informally, kind of like get some friends together, get a group of people together to talk, whatever it might be, or just be intentional about talking to your older relatives or, neighbors, whatever. What advice would you give to someone your age about the benefits of making that an intentional thing in their life?
One of the perks of being in the club this year was I really expanded my communication skills with meeting with our different representatives and well, partners, I guess I should say. And then the representatives that were on the call. And then every year you meet a new student, especially when people are training. And of us, I mean, we still talk to Chloe all the time too, and she stays with it, and it just gets you out there, gets you more comfortable. I might lose signal again. It's flickering.
Yep, that's okay. We were glad we could get you in there. I'm going to turn this question to Alice because Alice is the oldest of us.
Yes. I guess I can give an example of something that happened with the my intergenerational dialogues on TikTok. Um, I was talking about my generation being, make love, not war. That was our mantra. And, we were fighting against Vietnam and, free love and sex and drugs and rock and roll. And we were gonna do it right. And then we grew up and we made bigger and better wars. And so I sort of have been talking about that, and the younger people are very interested in that, engaged in that, and we're not going to do that. And I'm like, well, listen to yourselves when you talk about Israel, Palestine. you know, we're right, and the other guys are terrible, and they're killing each other, and we're not going to kill each other, but we're killing each other by saying we're not going to kill each other. That sounds all too familiar. Be careful. So,
Interesting.
over a course of a dozen TikTok videos, those that kind of dialogue happened, and I enjoyed it. I think I shared something with people who are watching, and they certainly shared their experiences. Um,
Mhm. Yeah.
mm.
And so if you had a reluctant friend who is around your age, Alice, how would you encourage them to say, yeah, come on, join me with this, or not necessarily on TikTok, but join me
Yeah.
in a conversation with somebody younger?
I guess I would listen to what they would say, which is, "Oh, they don't know anything yet," or wait, they'll see," and talk about ways of engaging with that. If you think they need to know something, share what you know, and listen to their responses. And the learning goes both ways when you open up a space
That's right.
between two people, rather than closing it off by saying, "Oh, I've been there," or they'll learn, or something like that.
Yeah. Well, and anybody who's taught knows you learn often more from your students than you ever anticipate, right? And so and I tell my students often, I'll say, just like every, human needs to learn how to walk and talk, every generation needs to learn how to function as a generation. And just like you will fall and stumble and mess up when you learn to walk and talk, every generation's going to have its lessons to learn and will make its collective mistakes, just like those that came before. And as we get older, we have to remember that. When we're young, we have to remember that we too shall make many mistakes and lead to much disappointment to others and will inherit the narrative we're leaving them. And yet at the same time, when we're older, we need to realize that, that doesn't, just because we're young doesn't mean we don't know anything, and it's sort of that lifespan. And of course, when you're middle aged, that's when you're in that sweet spot. But but anyway. All right. So thank you so much for that round of discussion. What I'd like to do, and this will be a little more focused on the students, and well, I guess Gabriel and Sam as our intern. Let's look at the experience this semester of organizing, facilitating an event like Veterans Speak. Part of the goal of the Civics Corps is to help you practice these kind of pre-professional skills from organization, decision making, group work or teamwork, planning, all those kinds of things, to then actually the public speaking experience and, hosting something like this. These are all skills that you'll be able to transfer ideally into your professional worlds. Of course, you'll have personal benefit too, but, specifically the Civics Corps is geared towards developing those pre-professional skill sets. So, I'd like you to think about and talk about what kind of benefits you gained, what skills you advanced, what skills you brought to the table that you were then, able to actually say, hey, I learned this here and now I'm able to apply it here or advance those skills. And of course, any challenges you may have had. Were you nervous about the experience? Were you unsure about your public speaking? Those kinds of things. And what do you see of those skills? I know it's a long question, but of those skills then, after you kind of chaw over those, then where do you see that helping you in your chosen career path? And ultimately, would you recommend the Civics Corps to others for these reasons? So let's start with your skill sets and then transition into how you see those being transferable to your careers.
I would say for me, some of the skills I had already a rudimentary baseline for communication, being able to, present what I know and what I want to express to people.
Mhm.
But I think, of course, through events like Veteran Speak and like this, and like going on the radio for promotion and things like that, I was able to hone those skills and to make them even better than what they already were.
Mhm.
I think that that's going to be very helpful throughout my career because this is a lot of what, any business, really any job that you're going to be doing is you really need to be able to communicate, even if it's not with the customers, right? Even with your other coworkers, because you're going to be able to solve a lot of problems and just, conflicts at work by
Mhm.
just talking things through and making sure things are clear and being able to present your argument and really have the evidence to back that up and to also listen to what the other person has to say and maybe you are wrong and you have to understand that that could also be another side of it.
And Sam, you're coming at this now. This is your third time, but this time, as we mentioned earlier, you're what we consider a mentor member of the Civics Corps. You're also and the intern for the Civics Corps from the Waging Dialogue side of things. You've gotten to stretch your muscles a little bit differently this semester, and both working with students a little bit differently than amongst them just as a peer. What has been your experience like?
I had a lot of fun in my position this year. Um, I don't know if anyone else realized this. I'm a major procrastinator. I wait till the last minute to do everything. And I kind of couldn't this year. So as a student, I knew we had our meetings every certain night, every certain time. I also knew that we would work on it together. So then my week seemed a little more like clear, I guess, and I could procrastinate a little more. This time I had to send those emails. I had to contact these people. I had to make sure I did this. I had to respond when they emailed me. And at first I was like, oh man, someone's not going to show up on the panel because I'm going to forget to send them the Zoom link. And it worked out great. And I made sure I was more on top of it this time around. And I had fun. I felt like I was putting together a puzzle piece and I could just pick up my puzzle piece and go, they emailed me back, got that one done. Oh, they did this, got that done. And I think that's going to be very useful um, in the future with almost anything I work with project wise, because now I know the importance of making sure you send emails on time, you contact people that need to be contacted, you get the calendar sent out and you show up to the meetings and you write notes about everything so you don't forget. I think that is definitely what I took away this time around as a intern mentor versus being a student.
Awesome. That's really interesting to hear the differences and how that's helping you further develop your skill sets as you go through this. That's awesome. Um, so why would you recommend the Civics Corps to others?
I think, like we touched on before, it's really just a good way to get your foot in the door, to have those conversations between groups that you wouldn't have really already affiliated with, especially here on campus, right? Of course, our demographic, and with more online classes, you're not getting that exposure to those different generations. So I think through this, as either a participant in Civics Corps or even a viewer of Veteran Speak, you're able to really see that people, there is a lot more of a connection than you would think, right? It's hard to see around your walled garden. It's hard to see that we're all connected through our, societal and social experiences and the things that they did, how they impact us. So by
Mhm.
experiences like this, it's a lot, you can really see how that all ties together.
Nice. Thank you. Sam?
I agree with you. I think that getting your foot in the door really helps with this program that we're in. I am not a veteran, and my parents weren't in the military, neither were my grandparents. So it was something that I knew about and I appreciated, but I rarely went up and said, thank you for your service, or do you want to explain some of your stories to me? And I got to talk to veterans. I got to get their bios from them this year for our panel. Last year, I got to talk to one of our veterans on the phone a few times, and even after the event, he sent a video to Dr. Cleese to say hi and tell me I hadn't contacted him in a while and to make sure I do. And these are just people that I wouldn't have even thought to get their stories from. And I think that's why I would recommend it because you learn so much from something that maybe you didn't consider before. Or, I mean, some of us that haven't been a veteran might even have that sense of a little bit of a fear, like, I don't understand these connections between other veterans. And I don't want them to think that I don't appreciate their service or that I don't know what I'm talking about or I don't have family in it. And it helps you grow a lot as a person to talk to these different individuals. And that's why I've been back for so many years.
Which is awesome. Which is awesome. And we also over the years the program has evolved, and this is more kind of for folks watching, but the program has evolved over the years from being an on-campus event to then being able to bridge a couple campuses by doing the webinar approach, as well as then opening ourselves up nationally by our partnerships with three veterans organizations, the American Legion, Department of Michigan, American Merchant Marine Veterans, and Veterans for All Voters. And the students added trivia into the last one, which we continued this year. That was a lot of fun. It remains a lot of fun to have that little extra educational piece in there and a little play into our evening. And there's also the work that the students are doing to advocate for Vietnam War era merchant mariners to get their congressional, excuse me, to get Congress to recognize them as veterans. And students have been working on that. World War II merchant mariners were recognized as veterans and later got their congressional honors. Um, and so the students have undertaken that cause, and that's why we had some representatives from our representatives in our state representatives in Michigan to Congress at the event. So we're always expanding and always considering things, and a lot of it's 90% of it is really driven by the students' input and the students' feedback. Matt, Alice, why do you like doing this?
Well, I have to say, I learned a lot because except for one uncle who was in World War II, I don't know anyone in the military. And so it was, I guess I've had a few patients over the course of 50 years, but very few. New York City, there are not a whole lot of veterans.
Hmm.
And so it was eye-opening for me to see that subgroup of people together and talking to one another. I did have a thought about it maybe a title that's more kind of inviting, like, would you join the military or not? Or something that invites the students to give them a question, because veterans speak is veterans speaking. And,
Mhm.
I just found myself wondering if I were a young person, maybe, something with a question in the title that would invite me to.
So a little different take on our marketing maybe next semester.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, next year. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Matt, how about you? Why do you do the Civic Score
Well,
and Veteran Speak?
I mean, I very much enjoy veteran speak, of course. It's always it's always different and enjoyable and always covers different topics. But of course, I'm not directly that involved with it. And I've also had plenty of exposure to veterans, friendships with veterans throughout my life. So it's not something uh, dramatically outside of, my normal perspective. Uh, but I certainly enjoy it. But I do civics core because I like working with you guys. I like working with the students.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, that's really what it comes down to. I like to provide opportunities and I like to watch how people benefit from, you know, the work that we do and how it helps them in their endeavors. So that's why I do it.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I figure it gets a little bit of the flavor as why well, of course, I'm the club advisor. I didn't introduce myself at the beginning, but folks I probably guessed that. Why this work is so important. And for me personally, of course, it is an extension of what I do with my students in the classroom. It does allow me to do more projects and things that a classroom wouldn't allow and to really focus in on something that is very important, which is this um, increasing the goal of increasing intergenerational dialogue for our times so that we can reconnect, kind of like what Gabriel said. So well, let's go ahead and wrap it up. I'd like to thank you all for participating. I'd like to thank the students who are also not here for all of their hard work. You all did a wonderful job. Everybody who was participating did a wonderful job in contributing, whether it was just a little bit here and there throughout the semester. We've had many students who believe in the cause and have been active in whatever ways they could throughout the semester. So we really appreciated that. To our viewers, if you are interested in seeing more of the work of the Civics Corps, please visit Waging Dialogue's YouTube station. And if you have any specific questions or would like to recommend a veteran for potential future Veteran Speak events, you can reach out to me at, my name is June Cleese. You can reach out to me at Cleese, Kleesj, at baycollege.edu. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you folks out there in internet land for watching.